Ghosts, real or not? Are ghosts real? People everywhere believe in spirits. We hear stories, watch movies, and sometimes we feel something we can't explain. The idea of ghosts has been around for centuries. Cultures across the globe have tales of spirits, both good and evil. But what is the truth? Are these just stories, or is there something more out there? Shadows in the dark. Fear and fascination. Shadow figures are especially frightening. They lurk in the darkness, often unseen but felt. People describe a feeling of dread, a coldness, a presence that sends shivers down their spines. Why are we so drawn to these stories? Perhaps it's the thrill of the unknown, the possibility that something exists beyond our understanding, or maybe it's the fear itself that fascinates us. Sarah's story, a cold presence. Sarah, a young woman living alone, started feeling a presence in her apartment. It began subtly, with small, almost imperceptible changes in the atmosphere. At first, she dismissed the odd sensations as figments of her imagination, perhaps the result of stress from her demanding job. But as days turned into weeks, the feeling grew stronger, more insistent, and impossible to ignore. She'd wake up to cold spots, hear whispers, and see shadows moving in the corners of her eyes. The cold spots were the most unsettling, as if an unseen entity was standing right next to her, exuding an icy chill that penetrated her very bones. The whispers were faint, almost like a distant echo, but they carried a weight that made her heart race. The shadows, fleeting and elusive, seemed to dance just out of her line of sight, vanishing the moment she tried to focus on them. One night she woke up to a cold hand on her arm. The sensation was so real, so tangible, that it jolted her awake instantly. She could feel the icy fingers wrapping around her arm, sending a shiver down her spine. Her breath caught in her throat as she lay there, paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. Terrified, she turned on the light, but no one was there. The room was empty, just as it had been when she went to bed. The only thing that had changed was the palpable sense of dread that now hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She sat up, her heart pounding, and scanned the room for any sign of an intruder, but there was nothing. Just the eerie silence and the lingering cold. The experience left her shaken and afraid to be alone in her own home. She found herself constantly on edge, jumping at the slightest sound and feeling a perpetual sense of unease. The once comforting sanctuary of her apartment had turned into a place of fear and anxiety. She began to dread the nights, knowing that the cold presence would return, and she would once again be left questioning her sanity. Desperate for answers, she started researching paranormal phenomena, hoping to find some explanation for the terrifying events. But the more she learned, the more questions she had, and the more isolated she felt. Her friends and family, though sympathetic, couldn't truly understand the depth of her fear. Sarah was left to face the cold presence alone, unsure of what it wanted or how to make it go away. Section 4. Tom's encounter, the figure in the woods. Tom was hiking in the woods when he saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. The day had started like any other, with the sun peeking through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Tom loved these solitary hikes, finding solace in the quiet rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. But today, something felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a silence that seemed to press down on him as he ventured deeper into the woods. It was tall and dark, with no discernible features. The figure stood motionless, almost blending into the shadows of the trees. Tom squinted, trying to make out any details, but it was as if the figure absorbed the light around it. His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a person, an animal, or something else entirely? The longer he stared, the more unsettling it became. The figure seemed to pulse with a dark energy, a presence that sent chills down his spine. He stopped, his heart pounding, and watched as the figure seemed to melt into the shadows. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, as if it had never existed. Tom's breath came in short gasps, his body frozen in place. He wanted to run, to get as far away from that spot as possible, but his legs felt like lead. The forest, once a place of peace and tranquility, now felt like a living entity, watching him, waiting for his next move. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, and he hurried back to his car, never taking his eyes off the tree line. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made him jump. His mind played tricks on him, turning shadows into lurking figures. The path seemed longer than he remembered, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. When he finally reached his car, he fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He glanced back one last time, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching him. But the forest was empty, the shadows deep and impenetrable. As he drove away, the sense of unease lingered, a dark cloud that followed him home. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure, felt its gaze on him. He knew he would never forget that day, the day the forest showed him its darker side. Section 5, The Haunted House, A Couple's Nightmare. A couple, excited to start their new life together, moved into an old Victorian house. They soon realized they weren't alone. Footsteps echoed in the hallway at night. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects moved mysteriously. One night, the wife woke up to see a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. Their dream home had become a nightmare. Section 6. Alex's experience, The Shadow Man. Alex had always been skeptical of ghosts until he saw the Shadow Man. He was a rational person, always relying on logic and science to explain the world around him. Ghost stories were just that, stories, but one night, everything changed. It was late at night and he was working on his computer when he saw a dark figure walk past his doorway. The house was silent, the only sound being the soft hum of his computer. He glanced up, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the figure was unmistakable. He dismissed it as tiredness, convincing himself that his eyes were playing tricks on him. After all, he had been working for hours, and fatigue was setting in. But then it happened again. This time it was clearer, more defined. This time the figure paused and turned its head towards him. Alex could feel its gaze, even though he couldn't see its eyes. It was as if the shadow was aware of him, acknowledging his presence in the room. Alex froze, his blood running cold, before the figure disappeared into the darkness. He sat there, paralyzed with fear, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His mind raced with questions. Was it a ghost, a figment of his imagination, or something else entirely? He couldn't explain what he had seen, but he knew it was real. The experience left him shaken, challenging everything he thought he knew about the world. Over the next few days, Alex found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting the Shadow Man to reappear. He tried to rationalize it, but the memory of that night lingered, haunting him. He began researching similar experiences, hoping to find some explanation. What he discovered was a world of stories and encounters with shadowy figures, each one eerily similar to his own. It seemed he was not alone in his experience. The Shadow Man was a phenomenon that had been reported by many, often described as a dark, humanoid figure that appears and disappears without a trace. Some believed it to be a ghost, others a manifestation of negative energy, but no one had a definitive answer. Alex's skepticism began to wane as he delved deeper into these accounts. He reached out to others who had seen the Shadow Man, sharing his story and listening to theirs. Each tale added a piece to the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Alex felt a strange sense of connection to these people. They had all experienced something beyond the ordinary, something that defied explanation. And in that shared mystery, he found a semblance of understanding. The Shadow Man had changed him, opening his mind to possibilities he had never considered. He no longer dismissed the unknown but embraced it, knowing that some questions might never have answers, and that was okay. Because sometimes the mystery itself is what makes life so intriguing.